Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right. We have 2 more quick sessions before we have a break. So we have a 10-minute session now on why resilience isn't just about having a backup plan. It's about building blocks of resilience. And resilience is a really important thing. You know, we've all touched talking about resilience in the different talks today. You know, there's more cyber attacks. They're coming thicker and faster. And I'd like to invite Jacob Spencer, the Chief Revenue Officer of Bridge, up to the podium, because he's going to give us a little bit of a masterclass on why resilience isn't just about having a backup plan or a plan that we have in our desks. It's a living document. So can I invite you up to the stage if you're around? No? He's just outside. If you can go and get him, that would be great. Here he is. Your lateness is your greatness.
Oh, maybe. We'll find out, won't we? All right. Perfect. Well, sorry about that.
That's
It's actually
all right.
changed in the agenda, so it comes as a bit of a surprise. We'll see how we get on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why resilience isn't just about having a backup plan. And we'll talk through some proprietary research we've actually done at Bridge. And ultimately, this research was with 50 enterprise merchants doing greater than 10 million transactions per annum, and with revenues greater than 50 million at least online. The key thing that we found when doing this was ultimately that the true cost of payment outages was absolutely ginormous. So effectively, an outage is almost a certainty. Of the 50 merchants that we brought into the survey, 92% had experienced an outage in the last 2 years. Of those merchants, 50% stated it was between 1.1 million and 10 million in losses. So effectively, you know, the true cost of outage is quite seismic, and it's highly likely you're going to have one. But that then took us a bit deeper with the merchants, and we thought, are outages the only thing that, you know, is the key thing about having a resilient payment infrastructure? And the overall answer was no. Modern day resilience is slightly wider than that. We think it's about having an adaptable, interoperable, and flexible payment infrastructure. Now, what do we even mean by that? Well, ultimately, adaptability, the world of payments is changing, business is changing, and ultimately how you trade is changing. So you must be able to adapt to the changing requirements of your customer, the changing requirements of the markets that you operate in, and the changing requirements sometimes of legislation. What we found in our survey was that 44% of respondents said that technical integration was the biggest challenge to expanding their payment capabilities, and therefore they couldn't be adaptable. So resilience was hindered by that. Interoperability was a really interesting one. We believe that part of being resilient is by, you know, being able to use multiple payment service providers with no impact to your customer and ultimately providing a great customer experience. Well, we actually heard that while 78% in card-dominant markets use tokenization of the PSP, if that PSP goes down, only 12% of them can use a token on an alternate PSP. So ultimately, you can't move between PSPs, making your infrastructure non-interoperable and ultimately tied to your primary PSP. So the ultimate cost really of having a non-resilient infrastructure is not only outages, but also the complete inability to react to new market conditions, moving into new territories and providing, you know, positive market expansion. So what did that lead us to believe that true resilience is now? Well, if anyone's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's not dissimilar. At the bottom of this, you've got redundancy. We've got a firm belief system that the building block and the foundation of a true resilient infrastructure is redundancy. This means that you can move from one PSP to another, and that's not just because of outages. We've also seen instances where, for example, an issuer may go down, And you might be able to route successfully to an alternate PSP that does on-us acquiring, for example, keeping you up and keeping those issued cards accepted. So redundancy is the key building block. You've then got to layer on top of that flexibility. Now, this is the ability to change your infrastructure to respond to market conditions and needs. And this can be built with having a modular, centralized, and adaptable infrastructure architected in an appropriate way. We then believe there has to be interoperability. You must be able to move between payment service providers with ease, not be wholly reliant on the first one or the second one, but multiple, depending on market or requirement. Which is a great example of this. We have started working a lot in the Canadian market recently. We're seeing huge growth in Interac, and ultimately there's some very strong providers in that market. But being interoperable between them is very important because, like many, they do have downtime and outages. So you've effectively got to build interoperability on top of that. Then comes the really cool stuff. Then comes optimization. How do you route the transaction to the right place at the right time to ensure it's of least cost and first-time acceptance is the highest? Ultimately, this comes with continuous improvement and having to have a data model running underneath it. And then finally, once you've built all those, you've got future readiness. You can react to what's coming down the line. You can react to what's next, and ultimately, you can react to what the challenges of being in a payments team is going to be. So how do you build a business case for resilience that goes well further than, can we flip over to another PSP if there's an outage? Well, ultimately, it comes in 3 pillars. The CFO is probably going to be interested in the revenue that you can, keep or maintain when you have an outage. This might be, ultimately, you have an outage for an hour, how much revenue is potentially lost, and ultimately, what can you keep by flipping to an alternate PSP or having a redundancy built into your infrastructure. There's then also the other aspects of the fact that you might capture more if you have an optimized infrastructure. The next part is risk mitigation. Ultimately, your business continuity and disaster planning functions are very interested in how are you going to risk mitigate if the worst case scenario happens, your PSP goes down, or a large swathe of your PSPs goes down. What are you going to do? So it's about having no single point of failure, ensuring that there's a reduced operational risk, and ultimately having a single view of your customer so you can continue to operate optimally. And then finally, not to be forgotten, but customer experience. Customer experience is the key of payments. We hear time and time and time again, well, I never thought about payments until it went wrong. Well, you think about it when it's gone wrong, when you don't have a resilient infrastructure, and ultimately customer experience is impacted. Those customers may never return, and you may not gather the revenue from them. So building a business case should be relatively simple, and it's centered around the revenue impact of having downtime, mitigating risk, and keeping up service continuity, and ultimately providing an amazing customer experience to the people that use your service. Now, it wouldn't be a keynote if I didn't plug what we could help you with. And ultimately, I'm not going to go too much into that, but ultimately I think orchestration as a whole and as an industry is aiming to provide resilience at every single layer that we've talked about. Orchestrators now aren't just providing a one-size-fits-all service, they are providing modular building blocks that allow you to scale your payment infrastructure and adapt to what's coming down the line. Now, of course, at the key, we can switch between PSPs, but also we can provide data models and optimization and recommendations as to how you should move into new markets at pace. So, whilst orchestration is not the answer, I think what is the answer is building an amazing architecture yourselves and augmenting it with the right service providers, be that an orchestrator or other great PSPs in the market. The real plug is that we have published the research that I talked through at the top there of 50 enterprise merchants. I would love it if you get your phone out, scan the QR code, and sign up for early access to this research. We promise it doesn't go too heavy on bridge, and it does talk an awful lot about what these merchants experience and the financial losses and the business losses that they experience whilst having an outage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.